The Dechristianization of France during the French Revolution is a conventional description of the results of a number of separate policies conducted by various governments of France between the start of the French Revolution in 1789 and the Concordat of 1801, forming the basis of the later and less radical Laïcité movement. The goal of the campaign was the destruction of Catholic religious practice and of the religion itself. There has been much scholarly debate over whether the movement was popularly motivated as something forced upon the people by those in power, religion and the Catholic Church under the monarchy. In 18th-century France, the vast majority of the population adhered to the Catholic Church, as Catholicism had been since the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685, the only religion officially allowed in the kingdom. Nonetheless, some Protestants and Jews still lived in France at the beginning of the Revolution. The Edict of Versailles, commonly known as the Edict of Tolerance, had been signed by Louis XVI on the 7th of November 1787 and had given non-Catholics in France the right to openly practice the religions as well as legal and civil status, which included the right to contract marriages without having to convert to the Catholic faith. At the same time, libertine thinkers popularized atheism and anti-clericalism. The ancient regime institutionalized the authority of the clergy in its status as the first estate of the realm. As the largest landowner in the country, the Catholic Church controlled properties which provided massive revenues from its tenants. The Church also had an enormous income from the collection of tithes, since the Church kept the registry of births, deaths, and marriages and was the only institution that provided hospitals and education in some parts of the country. It influenced all citizens. The event that launched the revolution was the abolition of the privileges of the First and Second Estate on the night of the 4th of August 1789. In particular, it abolished the tithes gathered by the Catholic clergy. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen of 1789 proclaimed freedom of religion across France in these terms. Article 4. Liberty consists of doing anything which does not harm others. Thus, the exercise of the natural rights of each man has only those borders which assure other members of the society the enjoyment of these same rights. These borders can be determined only by the law. Article 10. No one may be disturbed for his opinions, even religious ones, provided that the manifestation does not trouble the public order established by the law. On October 10, 1789, the National Constituent Assembly seized the properties and land held by the Catholic Church and decided to sell them as assignats. On July 12, 1790, the Assembly passed the civil constitution of the clergy that subordinated the Roman Catholic Church in France to the French government. Fall of the monarchy. New policies of the revolutionary authorities. The program of Dechristianization waged against Catholicism, and eventually against all forms of Christianity, included destruction of statues, plates and other iconography from places of worship, destruction of crosses, bells and other external signs of worship, the institution of revolutionary and civic cults, including the cult of reason and subsequently the cult of the Supreme Being, the enactment of a law on the 21st of October 1793 making all non-juring priests and all persons who harbored them liable to death on sight. The climax of Dechristianization came with the celebration of the Goddess Reason in Notre Dame Cathedral on the 10th of November 1793. The Dechristianization campaign can be seen as the logical extension of the materialist philosophies of some leaders of the Enlightenment such as Voltaire, while for others with more prosaic concerns it provided an opportunity to unleash resentments against the Catholic Church and its clergy, the Revolution and the Church. In August 1789, the state cancelled the taxing power of the church. The issue of church property became central to the policies of the new revolutionary government, declaring that all church property in France belonged to the nation. Confiscations were ordered and church properties were sold at public auction. In July 1790, the National Constituent Assembly published the civil constitution of the clergy that stripped clerics of the special rights the clergy were to be made employees of the state, elected by the parish or bishopric, and the number of bishoprics was to be reduced, and required all priests and bishops to swear an oath of fidelity to the new order of faith. Dismissal, deportation and death. French priests had to receive papal approval to sign such an oath, and Pius VI spent almost 8 months deliberating on the issue. On the 13th of April 1791, the Pope denounced the constitution, resulting in a split in the French Catholic Church. Over 50% became abjuring priests, also known as constitutional clergy, and non-juring priests as refractory clergy. In September 1792, the Legislative Assembly legalized divorce, contrary to Catholic doctrine. At the same time, the state took control of the birth, death, and marriage registers away from the church. An ever-increasing view that the church was a counter-revolutionary force exacerbated the social and economic grievances, and violence erupted in towns and cities across France. In Paris, over a 48-hour period beginning on the 2nd of September 1792, as the Legislative Assembly dissolved into chaos, 3 church bishops and more than 200 priests were massacred by angry mobs. This constituted part of what would become known as the September Massacres. Priests were among those drowned in mass executions for treason under the direction of Jean-Baptiste Carrier. Priests and nuns were among the mass executions at Lyons for separatism, on the orders of Joseph Fouché and Collot de Bois. Hundreds more priests were imprisoned and made to suffer in abominable conditions in the port of Rochefort. Many of the acts of Dechristianization in 1793 were motivated by the seizure of church gold and silver to finance the war effort. In November 1793, the Département Council of Indre-et-Loire abolished the word dimanche. The Gregorian Calendar, an instrument decreed by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582, was replaced by the French Republican Calendar, which abolished the Sabbath, saints' days and any references to the church. Anti-clerical parades were held, and the Archbishop of Paris was forced to resign his duties and made to replace his mitre with the red cap of liberty. Street and place names with any sort of religious connotation were changed, such as the town of Saint-Tropez, which became Héraclès. Religious holidays were banned and replaced with holidays to celebrate the harvest and other non-religious symbols. Robespierre and his colleagues decided to supplant both Catholicism and the rival atheistic cult of reason with the cult of the Supreme Being. Just 6 weeks before his arrest, on the 8th of June 1794, the still powerful Robespierre personally led a vast procession through Paris to the Tuileries Garden in a ceremony to inaugurate the new faith. By early 1795, a return to some form of religion-based faith was beginning to take shape, and a law passed on the 21st of February 1795 legalized public worship, albeit with strict limitations. The ringing of church bells, religious processions and displays of the Christian cross were still forbidden. As late as 1799, priests were still being imprisoned or deported to penal colonies, and persecution only worsened after the French army led by General Louis Alexandre Berthier captured Rome and imprisoned Pope Pius VI, who would die in captivity in Valence, France in August 1799. Ultimately, with Napoleon now in ascendancy in France, year-long negotiations between government officials and the new Pope Pius VII led to the Concordat of 1801, formally ending the Dechristianization period and establishing the rules for a relationship between the Roman Church and the French state. Victims of the Reign of Terror totaled somewhere between 20,000 and 40,000. According to one estimate, among those condemned by the revolutionary tribunals, about 8% were aristocrats, 6% clergy, 14% middle class, and 70% were workers or peasants accused of hoarding, evading the draft, desertion, rebellion, and other purported crimes. Of these social groupings, the clergy of the Roman Catholic Church suffered proportionately the greatest loss. The Concordat of 1801 endured for more than a century until it was abrogated by the government of the Third Republic, which established a policy of laïcité on the 11th of December 1905. Toll on the Church. Under threat of death, imprisonment, military conscription, and loss of income, about 20,000 constitutional priests were forced to abdicate and hand over the letters of ordination, and 6,000 to 9,000 of them agreed or were coerced to marry. Many abandoned the pastoral duties altogether. Nonetheless, some of those who had abdicated continued covertly to minister to the people. By the end of the decade, approximately 30,000 priests had been forced to leave France, and others who did not leave were executed. Most French parishes were left without the services of a priest and deprived of the sacraments. Any non-juring priest faced the guillotine or deportation to French Guiana. By Easter 1794, fewer of France's 40,000 churches remained open. Many had been closed, sold, destroyed, or converted to other uses. Victims of revolutionary violence, whether religious or not, were popularly treated as Christian martyrs, and the places where they were killed became pilgrimage destinations. Catechizing in the home, folk religion, syncretic and heterodox practices all became more common. The long-term effects on religious practice in France were significant. Many who were dissuaded from the traditional religious practices never resumed them. Gallery.